Here with me now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, we are hearing a lot today from Democrats and Republicans pointing the finger the other way. We heard him call this the Trump shutdown. How is that productive?
Well, look, you have to have a certain level of competence to run the government. And frankly, it's breathtaking that when you control everything, you still can't keep the government open. But we have a real problem, and that is you have to be able to rely on commitments that the other side makes. And no one can rely on this president. You have a conversation with him at 9 a.m., and he changes his position 3 times by lunch. And you just can't operate that way. I think that this is a president who doesn't really have a strong moral conviction one way or another on most of these issues, but he allows himself to be moved by the last person he's talking with. So it's enormously difficult.
I hear what you're saying, but Democrats also have control of their own actions, right? You can't control what the president does necessarily, but here, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like what Democrats are saying is they're drawing a line in the sand, and if there is no compromise on this issue of DACA, and I know there are other issues too, but that seems to be the big one, then Democrats aren't going to vote in favor of whatever funding bill is put before them, so that means no end to the shutdown.
Well, I think as you just heard Senator Schumer point out, they did put a compromise on the president's desk. They did, frankly, make concessions to the president that many of us in the House aren't particularly comfortable with, but that's the nature of compromise.
Like?
Well, like funding for border security, which we don't think should be tied to the clock that this president has set in motion on these young kids. We don't think those young kids should be used as a bargaining chip to build a wall. But nonetheless, in the Senate compromise, there was language that the president wanted, and it looked like there was an understanding in the morning, and then the hardliners within the White House say, you can't do that, you can't do that, and by noon the understanding is gone. So look, they couldn't even get their own Republican members, all of them, on board in the Senate.
There were, I think, 4 members, Flake, Mike Lee, we know Lindsey Graham, and initially Senator Rounds was not going to vote for it, or vote against it, but he voted for it. I'm trying to remember the 4th one. But you're right, it wasn't all Democrats who voted against that funding bill. A lot of Republicans voted against it because they don't want to just keep kicking the can down the road, and they believe that's not good for the military specifically in terms of strategic planning.
We don't think that's good either.
But now the president and Republicans are framing this as Democrats picking the dreamers, putting the dreamers above the rest of the country. How do you respond to that?
Look, the simple reality is if they want to do their own budget and they don't want to consider any Democratic priorities, they control everything. They can do that. There ought to be a certain minimal level of willingness, even when you are in one-party rule, to work with the other side. And this crisis that we have with the Dreamers, that yes, we are very sympathetic to, because these young people don't know where their future goes beyond March. This crisis was completely of the president's own making. There was no reason this clock had to be ticking. But the president said, I'm going to repeal this without any resolution in sight. And so we are where we are. And we feel it'd be irresponsible to essentially just take a bill, pass a bill, and leave the fate of these people to the winds. We also think it's a strong priority for us that we ought to provide health care for kids. And we ought to provide a consistent budget for the Defense Department. These are priorities for Democrats. And if they want to work with us, they're going to have to give something in terms of
course,
priorities.
Republicans will say we had CHIP funding in this bill that Democrats voted against. We have military funding in this bill that Democrats just voted against. So they have an argument to be made that we gave you what you said you just wanted.
Well, they didn't, though. There was a compromise that would have given us, I think, enough of what we've asked for and given them enough of what they've asked for. And it appears there was an understanding in the White House that the president would later not hold up his end of the understanding. Okay. So we have made sincere efforts to compromise, but certain principles and values we're not going to give away if they want us to buy into their budget. If they want to do it on their own, and they have made every effort to do everything excluding any Democratic input, then go ahead, you control everything. But if you come to us. You can't tell us it's our way or the highway.
Let me ask you about the Russia investigation, because I can't have you here and not, especially given how much we talked about it in the first year of the presidency. And now, if you turn on any conservative media, they keep talking about this Nunes memo, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, that he's put out there, and many Republicans have taken a look at it, and they want it made public. Can you tell us about this memo? What exactly is it?
It is essentially a set of talking points that the Republican intel staff drafted based on the highly classified materials, which most of the Republican members were forced to acknowledge they've not even read, so they don't know how distorted these talking points are. But it's part of the narrative they want to push out, and interestingly enough, they've made common cause once again with Russian bots, because Russian bots are pushing their narrative out there. It's in a redux of the campaign. We have Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and Russian trolls and bots saying, you know, hashtag whatever the GOP narrative is. That ought to tell you a lot about what's driving this, and that is...
Why not allow people
narrative.
to look at it and let Americans make the decision for themselves about whether it's useful information or not?
Well, because the American people, unfortunately, don't have the underlying materials, and therefore they can't see how distorted and misleading this document is. The Republicans are not saying make the underlying materials available to the public. They just want to make the spin available to the public, and I think that spin, which is a fulsome attack on the FBI, is just designed to attack the FBI and Bob Mueller to circle the wagons for the White House, and that's a terrible disservice to the people, hardworking people at the Bureau. But more than that, it's a disservice to the country.
Adam Schiff, Congressman, thank you very much for coming on, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.